Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Safiyyah, your host. When people speak about women's rights in Islam, they often look at a few difficult narrations of Hadith. But when we take a step back and look at the Hadith more broadly, we see that women were speaking, they were worshiping, they were teaching, they were learning. They were very active parts of the Muslim community and society. We'll be looking at that now in relation to al-Halim Abu Shuqqah's work, women's emancipation during the Prophet's lifetime. Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
So let's talk about how the Hadith depict women, Dr. Shabir, on a whole, on a broad basis. How can we think about the way the Hadith speaks about women?
Yeah, we can see that from Hadith, it is evident that within the lifetime of the Prophet, peace be upon him, Safiyyah, women were very much a part of society, just like you mentioned. They participated in education, in public teachings, in public prayers, and so on. They acted very much independently, and this is surprisingly so. I know it sounds trite today in modern society to say that, okay, women had these rights or they were like this. But if we contrast this with what is often presented as the ideal pietistic Muslim society, then you see that, those who say, okay, we have this Puritan society of Muslims that we're going to cultivate from scratch and is going to be just like the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, they got it wrong. It's, when we go back to the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, we see that women actually were independent. They were free to move about and participate in the society in a variety of ways. So we can look at some of these ways.
Yeah, let's look at some examples.
Okay.
One example, for example, is the way that women were becoming Muslim independent of their families or their husbands. So maybe you can speak about that, Dr. Shabir.
Yes, it is often mentioned that there are women who defied their families by becoming Muslim. And we have an example in Habiba, who became one of the mothers of the believers. She migrated with her husband to Abyssinia. And, there her husband died, but she maintained her religion of Islam. And eventually she was married to the Prophet, peace be upon him. She became one of the mothers of the believers. But other than this, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, got the directive from God to warn his family, he called out to women by name. He called out to Safiyyah, your namesake, who was the aunt of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And he called out to Fatima, his daughter, announcing to them that, okay, he has a message to preach, and if they adhere to his message, this is to their benefit. If they don't, this is to their loss. And they're treated as independent individuals. It's not dependent on what their families might do.
So was he calling out to them publicly, like in a public assembly? Okay.
Yeah, and so he's calling out to them by name, obviously. Yes, in that public assembly.
Because sometimes nowadays, like some Muslims are even reluctant to even mention their wives' names in public.
Exactly. This is one of the things that Abu Shuqqah, has a beef about. That in some and I experienced this as well. I travel together with a group of Muslims who want to promote the message of Islam by starting with the Reformation from within. Muslims should reform themselves. I benefited a lot from traveling with the group and adhering to its principles and so on. But I was surprised on one occasion when we had, most often it is men that go out in the groups. And obviously because women have their babies and so on to take care of, and men have a little bit more freedom to travel, or at least this is how we thought about it decades ago. Now, things are changing now, right? But when we went together with a group, when there were both males and females, the men were staying in one house, and the women were, or the men were staying in the mosque, and the women were staying in the house of some community member who vacated his home. At least the men vacated the home to join the other men, and the women were there in the house. So when it was time to discuss about, who's going to do what and so on for the group, everything is done by mutual consultation. But it so happens that the consultation was being done only among the men. And then tasks were being assigned to the women. But you couldn't name the women. you could only mention, this is the wife of such and such a person. So the man would be named, but the woman would not be named. And I tried to understand why. Like, it's a simple thing just to name the woman. But they said, no, you can't name the woman. This is like contrary to whatever, it's to norms and customs and decency. And you can see where that thinking comes from. Like, the person's name, this is a step forward. The next thing you can talk to the person because you know the person's name. You can address them and call them out from a crowd or whatever. But it's always a question of what is the dividing line between decency and indecency? How much is normal, practical, and fine in society, and different societies and different families and so on may draw the line differently. But clearly, you can't go from one extreme to the next, right? And to say that the woman cannot be named, this certainly is an extreme, because it has so many repercussions for society. Women become now nameless in society. This is a big thing. It's not something small. On the other hand, if we say, okay, the name of the person, how much does that contribute to people committing acts of infidelity? It's really a far cry. So the slippery slope, is a type of argument where a person says, no, don't do that one thing, because if you do that one thing, you'll do everything. It's as if everything is a slippery slope. If you just take one step, you go all the way down to the bottom, like a slide in a children's playground, right? But things can be on steps, right? If you go to one step, doesn't mean you have to take the second step. You can stop right where you are, or you can go to like a platform in the middle of a flight of stairs where you have a good resting point, and you're not going any further. You don't have any need to go further. In fact, if you want, you can go back up if you feel that you've come down too far. Everything by gradation. So yes, the women were named. And this not only on this occasion, but Abu Shuqqah has shown in many other occasions that women were actually mentioned by name. And not only in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, but in great works of Islamic scholars. If a woman was mentioned and she wasn't named in the narrative, they're trying to find out who was the woman, and they're trying to actually give a name to her because they're concerned with the history. And you can't write the history fully if you don't name the individuals. Okay, so coming back to,
we digress. Okay, let's talk about, for example, women worshiping.
Yeah.
Because, were women out and about participating in congregational prayer, for example?
Yes, women, several narratives show that the women came out to the prayers, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, told the men, do not prevent the handmaidens of God from coming to the mosque. Women came, obviously, according to their convenience. Some, may have come early in the morning, maybe when their children are still asleep, and so on. They even participated not only in the daily prayers, which are a regular requirement, but in the eclipse prayer, which just happens only on the occasion of a solar or lunar eclipse. They also attended janazah prayers, funeral prayers for the dead, and the Eid prayers, which is a large gathering of people. And when people gather in such large numbers, it's hard to control who's talking to whom and so on. One might say, oh, there's going to be a lot of fitna and corruption and whatever, so keep the women indoors. No, but the Prophet, peace be upon him, is noted to have encouraged women to come out. Even, the women who, according to practices at the time, normally might not have come out, they should also come out. And if one did not have an outer garment to come out for the occasion, they should borrow one from somebody who has two, and so on. So this was all encouraged. The Prophet, peace be upon him, set aside a special day for teaching the women on their request. And after the Eid prayer, he went specifically to the women's area where they gathered, and he addressed them directly, and they gave charity. And the Prophet,
so women were not completely occupied with their household duties. It seems like they had time to go about and learn and understand the faith.
Exactly.
Right?
And some of them became very important teachers. For example, Aisha, the mother of the believers, is one of those who narrated a couple of thousand hadiths. And this is like a large number among the hadith narrators. So she's one of the top narrators of hadith. And in fact, some of her hadiths are very pertinent. And in many cases, she contradicted the men who were narrating things about the Prophet, peace be upon him. And she basically lambasted them, like either they forgot forgot, or they made a mistake, or how could it be like that they're speaking like this? And I know the Prophet, peace be upon him, was like this, contradicting them. So some of the hadiths that she narrated are very familiar to us. Like, for example, man ahdatha fi amrina hadha ma laysa minhu fahuwa yurad. Whoever invents in this matter of ours that which is not pertinent to it will be rejected. This is often cited in Friday sermons, but it's interesting to know that we, have to thank al-Mu'minin Aisha for that.
She's our teacher, after all, even now. Yes.
And then we can mention also Hafsa, who was careful to keep a copy of the Quran, and she also had her eye on the political matters of her day. Her father did not appoint a successor, and she wanted to, she gathered the help of her brother to talk to her father, and she said she will talk to her father directly, but she wanted the brother's support, and that, he should appoint a successor. And so we have it that women like this did participate publicly in matters of society.
So that's very interesting, Dr. Shabir, because when we think of the hadith, we think of just specific narrations that say negative things about women, but it seems like the hadith is, littered with stories about women doing various things in society.
Yes. And what those who want to say that, those no longer apply, they might want to say, okay, all of this happened like in early days of Islam or whatever.
Yeah.
But it is also evident that much of this happens, towards the end of the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him.
Like some women were fighting in battle and things like that, right?
Exactly. And Aisha radiallahu anha, God be pleased with her, led a delegation, including some other senior companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, those who, according to Muslim tradition, are called al-Ashara al-Mubashara, those who were given the glad tidings that they will be in paradise, such as Talha and Zubair, and they marched together from Medina all the way to Mecca and then to Kufa and participated in a battle in which Aisha was obviously a leader.
So the implication, Dr. Shabir, is that, men and women were not segregated in this society, in the way that we imagine it today.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah. So all of this is very important to highlight, and all of this comes through from a careful study of the Hadith, as Abu Shuqqah has demonstrated, that women participated in so many different avenues of public life, and this went on within the lifetime of the Prophet, peace be upon him, until his demise, and then even after his death. Women performed i'tikaf, or the seclusion in the mosque, during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and even after his death. That's just one example of how women were out and about, and they actually were in the most public of places in the Muslim society.
Really interesting stories, Dr. Shabir. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslim Media Hub, the new home of Let the Quran Speak.
Here we spread positivity and good. We help people experience the beauty of Islam and help them appreciate and understand Muslims.
This beautiful building we purchased at cost $2.3 million.
Yeah, we've already raised a third of that money, and with your help, inshallah, we can pay off the rest.
So we're looking for people who can give $1,000 each. If you can be part of the select group, that's amazing.
Otherwise, just please give whatever you can. Every dollar counts.
It's our collective responsibility to share the message of Islam with our fellow human beings. Please help us continue this good work.
It's a sadaqah jariyah, something that will continue to be a benefit to the Muslim community long after Safiyyah and I are gone.
Please support our work at muslimmediahub.com.
Your support is zakat eligible and tax deductible.
May Allah bless you and your loved ones today and always. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.